Long before the mountains learned to tremble, long before the wolves learned to kneel, there was a woman who loved too much. Her name was Seraphine, a healer, a keeper of ancient fire, a woman who touched the wounded and made them whole with nothing but her hands and the soft silver glow of her gift. The packs called her blessed. The spirits called her daughter. And for a brief, shining season, one brutal alpha called her friend. His name was Logan. He came to her half dead, 3 arrows in his side, blood in his teeth, eyes glazed with the kind of pain that breaks men before it kills them. She saved him anyway, not because she owed him, not because she feared him, but because Seraphine believed, with every broken, beautiful piece of her healer's heart, that even monsters deserved mercy. She did not know then what she was giving the world. She did not know that the child sleeping in the cradle beside her fire would one day shake the foundations of every territory in the north. She did not know what they would do to her for it. But she knew the oath Logan swore before he walked back out into the dark. "If you ever fall," he said, "I will protect what you leave behind." She smiled like she already knew the ending. Maybe she did. Healers often do. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, like, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for epic Lycan king romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. The Girl Without a Wolf. The rain came hard over the black hollow pack lands. It came the way catastrophe always comes, suddenly, violently, and without apology. It turned the dirt roads into dark rivers and drove the wolves indoors where firelight and laughter waited. Laughter that was not for everyone. Freya moved through the storm with a bucket of bloody water balanced against her hip, her thin dress soaked through to her skin, her bruised arms shaking with cold and effort, and the particular kind of exhaustion that settles into the bones of people who are never allowed to rest. She was 20 years old. She had been exhausted since she was 8. That was the year her mother died. That was the year everything changed. Inside the house, light glowed warm and golden through the windows. She could hear them before she reached the door. Her stepmother's sharp laughter, her stepsister's giggles, the low, satisfied rumble of her father's voice when he was deep in ale and comfort. Enzo's voice, low and lazy and always somehow directed at her, even when she wasn't in the room. Freya stopped at the threshold. She stood in the rain a moment longer than necessary, just breathing, just existing in the narrow space between outside and in, the only place in the world where no one could touch her. Then she pushed open the door. The warmth hit her like a fist. "You're late," her stepmother snapped, not even turning to look at her. Freya lowered her gaze immediately. "I'm sorry." It was always the first thing she said. "I'm sorry," as if she had been born apologizing, as if her very existence required constant, ongoing apology from her to the world. "You're always sorry," Enzo muttered. He was draped across his chair at the dinner table, long legs stretched out, a cup of ale in one hand and a slow, poisonous smile on his face. His eyes dragged over Freya's soaked dress and stayed there a beat too long. They always did. "Maybe if apologies were worth silver," he continued, "Father wouldn't be drowning in debt." Sharp laughter circled the table like smoke. Freya stood perfectly still. That was how she had survived 8 years of this house. Stillness. Silence. The art of making herself small enough that their cruelty had less to aim at. Her mother had been the opposite. Tall, warm, endlessly present. The kind of woman who filled every room she entered. The pack had loved her, respected her, brought their sick children and their broken bones and their grief to her door, and walked away healed. Freya had inherited her mother's face. Nothing else, apparently. No wolf. No gift. No power. By 13, the pack children called her cursed. By 15, even the servants stopped meeting her eyes. And now at 20, she lived as something between a ghost and a servant in her own father's house. Unwanted and unacknowledged, and somehow still breathing despite everyone's best efforts. Her father slammed a mug down onto the table. "Get back to the cellar," he said. "Logan's men will arrive tomorrow." Freya froze. The name hit her in the chest like cold iron. Alpha Logan, the ruler of the Northridge Pack. A name spoken in lowered voices throughout every territory she had ever known. A name parents used to quiet disobedient children. A name that made grown men sweat and powerful alphas reconsider their borders. A monster, the stories said. A conqueror. A killer. A man with silver eyes that had watched a dozen rival alphas die at his feet and felt nothing. Freya's voice came out carefully. Why would his men come here? Nobody answered immediately. Her stepmother's smirk appeared first, slow and satisfied as a cat with cream. Then Enzo's grin, wider and uglier. And then Freya understood. The understanding moved through her body like ice water. No, she whispered. Her father stood slowly from the table. He was not a large man, not physically, but he had the particular heaviness of a person who has never once in his life questioned his right to do exactly as he pleased. He moved across the room with that heaviness now, and Freya stepped back without meaning to. You should feel honored, he said. The word honored came out like something he'd practiced, something he'd told himself until it stopped tasting like a lie. A wolfless omega like you is worthless to this pack. At least this way you'll finally be useful. You sold me. It came out of her before she could stop it. The slap came harder. Her head snapped sideways with a crack that echoed off the low ceiling, and pain exploded across her cheek in a bright, blooming wave. She stumbled backward into the doorframe and caught herself there, hands gripping the wood, the room tilting. You belong to me, her father said quietly. That quiet was always the worst. It meant he had settled into certainty. It meant there was no more argument to be had. You have always been mine to place as I see fit. Freya pressed her fingers to her cheek. She did not cry. She had stopped crying years ago. The tears had simply run out, like a well that gets drawn from too many times without rain. Enzo rose from his chair. He moved the way he always moved, unhurried, predatory, convinced of his own welcome in every space he entered. He crossed the room slowly, watching her face, and Freya backed away step by step until the wall stopped her. He stopped close, too close. The ale was thick on his breath. You should thank us, he murmured, soft enough that only she could hear. A pretty thing like you doesn't survive alone in this world. His fingers brushed her waist, light as a threat. At least with Logan, you'll have walls around you, even if you hate the man inside them. Freya jerked away violently. Don't touch me. His eyes went dark. He was fast. She always forgot how fast he was. His hand found her throat and drove her back into the wall before she could do anything more than gasp, fingers closing just tight enough to make the message clear. You forget your place, he said. Freya clawed at his wrist. Stars burst at the edges of her vision. Across the room, her father watched, and did nothing. He had never done anything. Enzo leaned close to her ear, voice dropping to something thick and wrong. I could have had you first, he whispered. You know that. You've always known that. Freya's stomach turned to stone. Then, a knock hit the front door like a hammer blow. Everyone froze. A second knock followed. Heavier, slower, carrying the kind of deliberate, controlled power that doesn't need to rush because it already knows nothing will refuse it. Freya felt it even before the door opened. Alpha energy. She had no wolf. She had never shifted, never felt the bond, never understood what it was to share her body with a second wild soul. But some things go deeper than the wolf. Some things are woven into the marrow of everyone born into pack blood, no matter how diluted or sealed or supposedly absent. The dominance radiating through that door was old, heavy, the kind that bends the air around it. Enzo released her immediately and stepped back. Her father moved to the door with anxious hands. The door opened, and Death walked inside. He was larger than she expected. She didn't know why she expected anything. Stories never get size right. They always underestimate the weight of the real thing. Alpha Logan filled the doorway the way weather fills a valley, completely, inevitably, leaving no room for argument. His black coat was soaked through with rain. His dark hair was plastered against his forehead. Water dripped from the line of his jaw and gathered on the floor beneath him in small, quiet pools. He should have looked diminished by that. What things usually do. He didn't. His silver eyes moved across the room methodically, cataloging, assessing, dismissing, and then they found Freya in the shadow of the far wall. And stopped. The world went very still. Something passed across Logan's face. Something she didn't have a name for because she had never seen it on anyone who was looking at her. It was there only a moment, a flash of recognition, raw and startled and almost pained, and then it was gone, sealed away behind an expression of cold authority. His jaw tightened. Her, he said. One word. Flat. Certain. Like the naming of something he had already decided. Her father bowed immediately, nearly folding in half. As promised, Alpha. Freya pressed herself back against the wall. No, she breathed. Please. Logan crossed the room. He moved the way predators move, not quickly, but with that terrible economy of motion that tells you speed is entirely available whenever he chooses to access it. He stopped in front of her and looked down, and Freya felt the full force of his closeness like a physical pressure. He smelled like rain and pine and something darker beneath, something ancient. His silver eyes moved over her face, stopped at her bruised cheek, traveled down to the reddening marks on her throat. The room changed. It was subtle, the way pressure changes before a storm breaks. The temperature dropped. The air went tight. Freya watched Logan's expression shift from controlled authority into something that made every person in that room take a single involuntary step backward. Who touched her? Silence. Her father stammered. She can be. She sometimes requires. The girl is difficult. Logan moved so fast that Freya didn't process it until it was already done. Her father hung 3 inches off the ground, Logan's fist wrapped around his collar, the older man's face purpling as he clawed uselessly at the arm holding him. Her stepsister screamed. Her stepmother knocked over a chair, getting away from the table. Enzo stood completely frozen. His earlier confidence evaporated entirely, the blood gone from his face. Logan said nothing for a long moment. He simply held her father in the air and let the silence do the work that words would only diminish. I asked, he finally said, very quietly, who touched her? Sold to the beast. Freya had never seen terror on her father's face before. She had seen his contempt, his dismissal, his cold, flat certainty that she was less than everything around her. But terror, real terror, the kind that strips away all the layers a person builds around their cruelty and leaves only the animal underneath, that was new. She wasn't sure how she felt about it. Logan released him after a moment that stretched long past comfort. Her father collapsed and coughed and did not try to stand, which Freya thought showed more self-preservation instinct than she'd credited him with. The Alpha turned back to her. Come. Freya shook her head. I won't. His eyes narrowed very slightly. I said come. The Alpha command hit her like a wave. She felt it in her bones, in the blood, in whatever deep, wordless part of her brain still remembered what pack hierarchy meant. It pressed against her mind with the full weight of his dominance, and every instinct she had that understood submission wanted to respond to it. But something else in her, something she hadn't known was there, pushed back. Logan noticed. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Something closer to fascination. Freya met his silver gaze with everything she had. Why are you taking me? His eyes held hers for a moment. Then, to breed heirs. The words landed like a stone in still water. Humiliation spread through Freya's chest in slow, hot rings. She heard her stepfamily exhale with satisfaction. The sound of people who had gotten exactly what they wanted and didn't need to pretend otherwise anymore. She hated them. She hated him. She hated the way her body noticed him despite everything. The breadth of his shoulders, the controlled power in the way he held himself, the absolute, immovable certainty of him. She hated the way some traitorous part of her recognized his presence the way a compass recognizes north. Logan extended his hand. Move willingly, he said, or I carry you. It wasn't cruelty exactly. It was simply the flat statement of someone who does not entertain the possibility of being refused, delivered without heat, because heat would suggest doubt. Freya stared at his hand, at the scar that ran from his wrist to the heel of his palm. Old, deep, the kind that comes from something deliberate. She looked up at his face. I hate you, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Just barely. The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. You will survive me, he said. Then he leaned forward, and his voice dropped to something meant only for her. But you will never escape me. The carriage smelled like cedar and leather and the cold mountain air that clung to everything from Northridge territory. Freya sat with her arms wrapped around herself and stared through the small window at the passing darkness, while Logan rode alongside on a massive black horse that moved like smoke. He hadn't spoken since they left Black Hollow. But every time she glanced at him, which she told herself she was only doing to track the threat, not for any other reason, she caught him looking at her first. Always at her. With that same strange expression she couldn't name. She told herself it was calculation. Appraisal. The look of a man assessing newly acquired property. But it didn't look like that. It looked like something else entirely. Something almost like recognition, or grief, or the particular exhaustion of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is finally, at great cost, done waiting. Freya pressed her forehead against the cold glass and made herself stop looking. Northridge Pack. The Northridge fortress appeared out of the darkness like something the mountain had grown rather than built. Massive, stone, ancient in the way that means not merely old but layered. Every generation adding to the walls. Every alpha leaving something of themselves behind until the structure itself had become a kind of accumulated will. Armed wolves patrolled every entrance. Torches burned in iron brackets against the stone. As the carriage passed through the main gates, Freya felt the weight of the place settle around her like a second skin, oppressive, immovable, and undeniably impressive in the way that things built to last forever always are. The pack members who came forward to receive them bowed immediately. Alpha. Freya studied their faces as they straightened. She had expected awe. She had expected the particular admiration that collects around powerful men like moths around fire. She saw fear instead. Not the sharp, flinching fear of abuse, but the deep, constant fear of people who live in the presence of something they cannot fully predict. People who respect the cage and are not entirely sure there isn't something in it that could outlast the bars. Logan dismounted first. Then he came to the carriage door and opened it himself. The gesture sent a ripple through the assembled wolves. Freya felt it, the collective quiet confusion of people watching their alpha do something unexpected. Something soft. Something that didn't fit. She climbed out without taking his offered hand. His expression didn't change. An older woman stepped forward, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, wearing the bearing of someone who has been running a household through multiple difficult alphas and expects to outlast this one too. She's the Omega, then? Logan's eyes cut to her with the precision of a blade. She has a name. The woman bowed quickly, color rising in her face. Forgive me, Alpha. Freya looked at him. He was already looking at her. She looked away first. He guided her through the main corridor with one hand resting at the small of her back. Not gripping, not controlling, just present. Like punctuation. Like a statement she hadn't consented to. She was intensely, uncomfortably aware of it with every step. Wolves pressed back against the walls as they passed. Whispers followed them like a second shadow. That's her? She's so small. No wolf scent at all. Why would he choose a wolfless Omega? Freya lowered her head. The words settled into the familiar grooves of her shame like water into old cracks. Then Logan stopped walking. The corridor went utterly silent. Every wolf in the hallway held their breath. Logan spoke without turning around. Anyone who disrespects her, he said conversationally, loses their tongue. He resumed walking. Nobody whispered again. Freya stared at his back as she kept pace with him and tried to make sense of what she was seeing. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. No, he agreed. Then why? Because you are under my protection now. He glanced at her sideways. That is not a conditional statement. Freya thought about her father's house. About what protection had looked like there, absent, performative, weaponized. She tried not to let herself believe in his version. It was harder than it should have been. The Alpha's hunger. She learned Northridge in pieces. The kitchens were enormous, fed 40 wolves on a regular evening. The training grounds started before dawn, and the sound of it, steel on steel, carried through the stone walls and woke her every morning for the first week. The pack healer was a quiet woman named Mira who left food and salve outside Freya's door without being asked and never once looked at her with pity, only the professional assessment of someone cataloging damage. Logan's warriors were disciplined and competent and slightly terrified of their alpha in a way that seemed to have made them extremely efficient. Logan himself was a contradiction she couldn't resolve. He was brutal in the training grounds and gentle in the way he handled anything injured. She watched him once, from an upper window, crouched beside a wolf pup that had gotten its paw caught in a fence, and worked the small leg free with a focused, patient care that made her chest do something complicated. He handed down judgments with the fairness of someone who has thought hard about justice, not just power. And at night, he came to her room. He did not enter. He sat in the chair outside her door. She could hear it, the specific creak of wood under his weight, and he stayed until the early hours of the morning, and then he was gone. He never explained it. She never asked. But she slept better on those nights, and she hated herself a little for noticing. One evening, the tension that had been building for days finally cracked. She had been sitting by the fire, reading one of the books she'd found in the fortress library, old, dry history, but better than the silence, when the door opened and Logan entered without knocking, because Logan did not knock. He moved to the chair by the opposite hearth and sat in the way he always sat, massive and still, his silver eyes catching the firelight. Freya set down her book. "What do you want from me?" He looked at her steadily. "You already know. You said heirs." She kept her voice flat. "So, when does that begin?" Something moved through his expression that she almost couldn't follow. "That," he said, "is not what I want from you." She frowned. "Then what?" He stood. She hadn't seen him decide to. One moment he was seated and the next he was crossing the room, and she rose automatically because some instincts override the will entirely. She backed up one step and the wall stopped her, and then he was there, close enough that she could feel the heat of him even through the stone cold of the fortress. He was always warm. She had noticed that. She had tried not to. "You confuse me," he murmured. "Good," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Careful. That sounds like flirtation. It's a tactical advantage." He studied her face with that particular intensity that made her feel seen in a way that was both frightening and, underneath the fright, beneath the armor of her wariness, something she had no name for. Something she had never felt before. "You feel it too," he said quietly. "No. Freya." I said no. His hand rose. He didn't touch her. He held it in the air beside her face, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin, and she watched his restraint, the careful deliberateness of it, and understood that this was a man who wanted to take and was choosing not to. That this cost him something. "If you fear me so much," he said, "why does your body lean toward me every time I come close?" She looked down at herself. She was leaning toward him. Barely. Incrementally. But leaning. Unmistakably. Like a plant finding light. She jerked back and hit the wall again. Logan watched her with dark, patient eyes. "You smell like moonlight and danger," he murmured. "Every wolf in this fortress can sense it. They don't understand it. Neither do I." He paused. "But I have been thinking about nothing else for 20 years. Freya stared at him. "What does that mean?" He finally touched her, one finger beneath her chin, lifting her face toward his. Gentle with the specific care of someone handling something he is terrified of breaking. "It means," he said softly, "that you are the most dangerous thing I have ever been near." His thumb brushed her bruised cheek. "And I have never wanted anything more. Blood and secrets." Everything changed the night Freya found the hidden cellar. She had been restless. She was always restless in this place, this enormous stone structure full of things she wasn't sure she was allowed to know. And she had gone exploring the lower halls in search of the herb stores she'd heard Mira mention. She heard voices first. Logan's voice, low, clipped, the tone he used when he was keeping something contained. And a man she didn't recognize. She should have walked away. She didn't. "She cannot know the truth yet," Logan said. Freya went completely still outside the half-open door. "The seal is weakening," the other voice said. "Nervous. Our observers confirmed it 3 nights ago. If her powers awaken without preparation. I am aware. Alpha, the Bloodfang pack has sent scouts. If they sense her before she can defend herself." I said. Logan repeated, very quietly, "I am aware." A pause. "She's wolfless," the other man said. "Surely. Is she?" Logan's voice came out strange. Stripped of something. Silence. "You aren't certain," the man said slowly. "No," Logan admitted. "I am not." Freya's heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she was certain they could hear it through the door. She shifted her weight to leave. The floorboards screamed beneath her foot. The room went silent instantly. The door burst open. Logan appeared in the frame, and his expression, the flat, terrible stillness of someone who has just had a plan disrupted, lasted exactly 1 second before he grabbed her arm and pulled her inside. The other man, youngish, sandy-haired, wide-eyed, was already backing toward the far wall. "You were listening," Logan said. "You lied to me." Freya pulled against his grip. "You've been lying to me. What powers? What seal?" Logan looked at the other man. "Leave us," he said. The man, Darius, his beta, practically ran. The door closed. Logan released her arm. For a moment, they simply stood across from each other in a cellar lit by a single torch, breathing the same dense air, and Freya felt the shape of the thing between them shift. Whatever careful performance they had been maintaining cracked slightly, and underneath she saw something raw and old and impossibly complicated. "Tell me what you heard," he said. "Tell me what it means," she said back. He turned away from her, put his hands on the stone table in the center of the room, and leaned on them, and stared at nothing for a long moment. "You were never meant to survive childhood," he finally said. The words landed in her stomach like cold stones. What? Certain alphas? Old families? Ancient bloodlines that remember what the original packs were. They knew what your mother carried, what she could pass to a child. He paused. They made arrangements. Freya said nothing. He turned to look at her. "Your mother came to me the week before she died," he said. She had already felt them closing in. She knew what was coming. "She asked me to," he stopped, reorganized something in his expression. "She asked me to promise her something." "What?" "That I would wait until you were strong enough." His silver eyes held hers steadily. "And then bring you here, where I could protect you from what would come. You've known about me for 20 years. Yes. You watched what happened to me." Something crossed his face that she recognized, distantly, as guilt. Not performed guilt, the real kind. The kind that doesn't try to explain itself because it knows no explanation reaches far enough. "Yes," he said again. Freya felt the weight of it settle across her shoulders. 8 years of being the ghost in her father's house. 8 years of Enzo and her stepmother and the slow grinding work of being made to feel like nothing. 8 years that she might have been, if not safe, at least somewhere else. Someone else. "Why?" she asked very carefully. "Did you not come sooner?" "Because if I claimed you too early, if they saw that I had moved on you, they would have understood what you were." He straightened. "And they would have killed you before you had any power to protect yourself with." She absorbed that. She didn't want it to make sense. It made sense. "What am I?" she asked. He crossed the room, stopped directly before her. "Your mother belonged to an ancient bloodline," he said. "The first healers. The ones who carried something older than the wolf bond. Something that predates the packs themselves." He paused. "You were not born wolfless. You were sealed. Someone placed a binding on your power the day you were born, to hide what you are from the ones hunting you." Freya stared at him. "And as you get older," he continued, "the seal weakens naturally." "Which means?" "It's starting to crack." "Yes." She breathed in, breathed out. "What happens when it breaks?" Logan looked at her for a long moment. "Everything changes," he said. "The awakening." She didn't sleep. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and felt the architecture of her entire life rearrange itself around a new center of gravity. Not broken, sealed. She had spent 20 years believing herself defective, believing the cruelty was merited, believing that the pack was right to dismiss her, that her father was right to sell her, that Enzo's contempt was simply the accurate assessment of what she was worth. The shame had been the floor she stood on, the ceiling she lived under. It had held its shape so long she'd stopped noticing it was a cage. Not broken. The rage came first. Real rage, not the dull, suppressed, carefully managed emotion she had permitted herself in small doses over the years, but something alive and enormous, something that sat up inside her chest and stretched and recognized its own size for the first time. She sat up in bed, and something answered the rage. Pain detonated in her chest like a door being kicked in from the other side. Freya gasped and doubled forward, and the world dissolved into silver light. Blinding, ancient, not painful exactly, but overwhelming. The way lightning is overwhelming. The way the moment before a storm breaks holds too much electricity for ordinary air. Dark energy burst from her body in waves. She heard the window crack. She heard the stone groan. She heard herself scream, though she didn't remember deciding to. Logan came through the door at a dead run and caught her as she fell from the bed. She registered his hands, his warmth, his voice saying her name with an urgency she had never heard from him before. She looked up at his face and saw something she would think about for a very long time afterward. The ruthless alpha of Northridge. Afraid. Not of her. For her. That distinction felt important. Her eyes burned from the inside out, and she knew somehow without being told that they were silver now. Not his gray silver, but something older. Something that had been waiting behind the seal for 20 years and was done waiting. The wolf woke up. She felt it like the turning of some enormous key. Like a second heartbeat that had been there all along but silent. Drumming now, suddenly, loudly, undeniably present. Warm and wild and vast in hers. Visions poured through her mind. Fire across a dark sky. A circle of standing stones in moonlight. A woman's hands, her mother's hands, placing something luminous into an infant's chest and pressing it closed, weeping. A massive black wolf standing at the edge of a cliff in the storm. Logan, younger, kneeling in the snow before a woman Freya recognized from her dreams, kneeling and swearing something, his voice shaking. And herself, standing on a cliff edge in furred armor, her wolf beside her, silver light pouring from her hands and upward into a sky full of stars. She didn't look frightened in the vision. She looked like something that the dark was frightened of. Then the vision collapsed. The world went black. Logan caught her before she hit the floor, and she had just enough consciousness left to register his arms, his warmth, and the way he held her. Not like something fragile, but like something precious. Like something he had been waiting to hold for a very long time and was not going to let go of now. The obsession. She woke up 3 days later. She knew it was 3 days because the light through the window had changed quality and the candles had been replaced twice, and Logan looked like something that had been standing in a hard wind for too long. Still standing, still composed, but stripped down to the essential thing. He was asleep in the chair beside her bed when she opened her eyes. One hand rested on the bed beside hers, close but not touching, as if he'd reached for her in sleep and stopped himself just before contact. She looked at his face. In sleep, the authority dropped away and left something else. He looked younger, more like a person and less like a force of nature. The exhaustion was written across him, the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension still held in his jaw even in sleep, the rumple of clothes that hadn't been changed. He hadn't left. She absorbed that without knowing what to do with it. She tried to ease her hand away carefully. His eyes snapped open instantly. For one unguarded moment, before he could arrange his expression into something controlled, she saw the relief. Clear and total and unperformed. Then the mask settled, and he sat up and poured water from the pitcher beside the bed and held the cup out to her and said, very steadily, "You're alive. You thought I'd die?" "Yes." He paused. "The awakening kills some. The ones whose seals run very deep." Freya took the water, drank. Her throat ached. How deep was mine? He looked at her. Very. She thought about that. About 20 years of compressed power sitting behind a seal, waiting. About what it must have felt like, from the other side of stone walls, watching and waiting and calculating risk. "You stayed," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He stood, moved to the window. She watched the line of his shoulders against the gray light. "Because I failed you once," he said. "And I will not fail you again." Freya watched him from the bed. "That's not the whole answer," she said. He turned to look at her, and for once his silver eyes didn't hold anything back. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The room was quiet. Outside, the wind moved across the battlements and whistled through the arrow slits, and somewhere in the fortress a door slammed, and wolves' voices rose and fell in daily life. "You said I was your obsession," she said. "Yes." "What does that mean?" He crossed back to the chair and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "It means," he said, "that I have thought about nothing else since I was a young man watching a healer's daughter sleep in a cradle and swearing to a dying woman that I would keep her safe." He paused. "It means that every decision I have made for 20 years has had you at the center of it, even when you didn't know I existed." Another pause. "It means that I am not a good man, Freya. I am a man who has done many things I cannot undo. But whatever piece of goodness is left in me." He stopped. She waited. "It has always been pointed at you," he finished quietly. The silence that followed was the loudest she had ever heard. The mate bond. The attack came at midnight. She woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of wolves screaming and the full-body alarm of her newly awakened senses registering threat from every direction simultaneously. Logan was already at her door when she opened it, covered in blood that wasn't his, eyes blazing silver, claws extended to their full, terrifying length. "Stay behind me," he said. She didn't argue. Not tonight. Enemy wolves came through the corridor in groups, and Logan took them apart with the brutal efficiency of someone who has been doing this for 30 years and has stopped finding it difficult. She pressed herself against the wall and watched him move and understood, viscerally, why his enemies built stories about him to keep their children obedient. He was not a monster, but he was something close to the edge of human. "Who are they?" she called over the noise. "Blood Fong pack." He grabbed an attacker by the collar and drove him into the stone ceiling and put him down. "Old enemies. Someone told them what you are." One of the dying wolves laughed through the blood in his mouth. "She belongs to the Shadow King," he said. "He has been waiting longer than your alpha has, little Omega. You cannot keep her from him forever." Logan ripped his throat out. The corridor went silent. The Shadow King, the name from her visions. The ancient presence at the edge of every terrible dream she'd had for as long as she could remember. Another explosion hit the lower fortress. The entire structure shuddered. And then, something tore open in Freya's chest. Not pain exactly. Something larger than pain. Something seismic and inevitable, like the ground shifting under a mountain. She looked down. A mark burned across her collarbone, silver, intricate, alive with light, following the line of her skin like something that had always been there and was only now becoming visible. Logan went completely still. He turned, stared at her collarbone, then raised his own hand, slowly, and pulled the collar of his shirt aside. The same mark, mirroring hers, blazing beneath his throat. "No," Logan said. The word came out like something had been knocked out of him. Freya backed up. "No, no, that's impossible. I don't have a wolf. I can't form a—" "You do now," he said. He sounded shaken in a way she had never heard from him. "Freya, don't." She was breathing too fast. "Don't tell me it's real. It can't be real." He crossed the space between them in 2 steps. "It's real." His voice was low, urgent, stripped of everything except the truth underneath it. "The mate bond is real. I felt it the moment you walked into that house in Black Hollow. I told myself I was wrong. I told myself it was the promise to your mother. I told myself anything that made it manageable." He looked at the mark on her collarbone like it was something sacred, and he was terrified of it. "I was lying." Freya felt it. That was the worst part. She felt it. The pull, the recognition, the sense of 2 things that have been searching for each other across enormous distance finally, impossibly close. The wolf that had just woken inside her turned toward him the way a compass turns, with the certainty of something that has no interest in argument. Her head knew all the reasons to resist. Her soul, apparently, had never learned to. "I hate you," she said. His hands came up to frame her face, so careful, so precise in their gentleness. The hands of a man who tears enemies apart and handles her like glass. "I know," he said. "I have every reason to hate you. Yes. You let them hurt me for years. You kept secrets. You took me from my home. Your home was killing you slowly," he said. "I know that's not a justification. I know it doesn't erase anything. I know. I hate you," she said again. "But your soul doesn't," he said softly. The words moved through her like light through water. Because they were true. That was the terrible, humbling, impossible truth of it. Her soul didn't hate him at all. Her soul was pressed against the inside of her chest, reaching toward him the way a plant reaches toward sunlight, with a devotion that predated choice. She didn't know whether to weep or surrender or simply stand in it. She chose to stand in it. For now, the Shadow King rises. 6 months later. The Queen did not wear white. She wore the deep silver gray of Northridge stone, trimmed at the collar and cuffs with the black fur of the northern wolves. The crown, if you could call it that, it was more like woven moonlight shaped into a circlet, sat in her dark hair, and caught the light of the throne room's 100 torches. Freya of Northridge, the Moonborn Queen. The name had spread through the northern territories the way fire spreads in dry season, faster than anyone expected, touching everything. She had not asked for it. She had not asked for most of this. But she had learned, in 6 months, that the things you don't ask for are often the truest things that come to you. Chosen things can be unchosen. The unchosen ones tend to stick. The Pax bowed when she entered a room. Not because Logan commanded it, though he had made it perfectly clear, once, in a tone that left no room for discussion, that anyone who showed her disrespect would find the consequences educational. They bowed because they felt her. The wolf that had finally woken inside her was not a small thing. It was not an ordinary thing. It was ancient and enormous, and when it moved, the air moved with it, and wolves felt it in their blood the way they feel weather changing. That deep cellular recognition of something that commands the body's attention without needing to speak. She was learning to live inside it. Logan was learning to live beside her. That was its own kind of diplomacy. He was not an easy man. She was not an uncomplicated woman. The mate bond between them burned steady and fierce and was, she had discovered, completely immune to the rational objections she periodically leveled at it. He was patient with her anger. She was honest with her fear. They argued, sometimes, with the particular heat of two strong-willed people who care too much to be indifferent. They argued about strategy and pack politics, and the 3 occasions she had, in his words, walked directly into a dangerous situation with absolutely no regard for her own physical safety. His language for those conversations was significantly more colorful than that. But at night, he was hers. And she, improbably, magnificently, furiously, was his. It was a winter night when everything changed again. The fortress was quiet. The wolves were settled. Logan was in the war room with Darius, working through the details of a treaty with the Eastern Pax, and Freya had taken herself to the high balcony above the throne room because she needed air and sky and the specific clarity that comes from standing at height and looking at something vast. The mountains were silver under a full moon. The world was very still. She felt the other presence a moment before she heard the voice. Something wrong in the air. Something old, in a way that made even her newly awakened wolf go still and uncertain, not cowering, but attentive. Alert in the way of something that recognizes kin and isn't sure how to hold it. You finally awakened. She turned. He stood at the far edge of the balcony. Tall, still, impossibly composed. He was beautiful in the way that ancient, dangerous things are beautiful. The kind that your eye wants to track because it's valuable data, not because you're foolish enough to find it safe. He wore no armor. No weapons that she could see. He didn't need them. The power coming off him was like standing too close to a fire. Palpable. Enormous. Old in a way that made Logan feel young by comparison. His eyes, when they met hers, were silver. Silver, exactly like hers. Her wolf growled. Not at the threat, exactly. At the recognition. The man smiled. It was a patient smile. The smile of someone who has been waiting so long that waiting has become simply the texture of their existence. I've been patient, he said. I want you to know that. Centuries of it. He stepped forward into the fuller moonlight, and she saw the runes now, old, complex, covering the visible skin of his arms, crawling up his neck. Not tattoos, not marks. They moved, very slightly, like something living that had made his skin its home. But patience has a natural end. The doors behind Freya slammed open. Logan came through them at a dead run with claws extended, and the full, terrible violence of him present and immediate. She felt the mate bond flare like a torch in a sudden wind, felt his fury and his fear for her as a physical pressure against her chest. He stopped when he saw the stranger. Something in his expression changed. Recognized. The stranger glanced at him. Careful, Alpha, he said pleasantly. What you're feeling right now is territorial instinct. It's understandable, but I'd encourage you to let it pass before doing something that can't be undone. Darkness moved. It was the only way Freya could describe it. The darkness itself gathered, condensed, and from the shadow behind the stranger a wolf took shape. Enormous, built from night and old power, its body so massive it made the balcony feel suddenly small. Red eyes opened. Ancient eyes. The eyes from her visions. Freya's wolf pressed against the inside of her chest, and she felt it doing something she hadn't felt it do before. Not aggressing, not retreating, but reaching. Searching for something in the presence across from it. Finding something. The stranger looked at her, and his expression changed. The patience dropped away. Underneath, it was something she wasn't expecting. Something almost tender. My daughter, he said softly. The world tilted. Freya's hand shot out and found Logan's arm. Solid, warm, present, and she held onto it as the balcony seemed to sway beneath her feet. The ancient runes on the stranger's skin pulsed with soft silver light. The same silver as her eyes. The same silver as her mark. The shadow wolf settled behind him like a second gravity. I have so much to tell you, the Shadow King said. And the darkness swallowed the balcony whole. The mountains remembered everything. They had watched kingdoms rise and fall and rise again. They had watched bloodlines thread themselves through centuries like rivers finding the sea, diverting around obstacles, going underground for stretches, surfacing somewhere unexpected, and beginning again with all the force of water that has been contained too long. They had watched a healer make an oath beside a fire. They had watched a young alpha kneel in the snow. They had watched a child grow up in the dark, believing herself broken, unaware that the darkness was just the seal. And now they watched the seal come fully undone. They watched a queen stand on a balcony in the moonlight and reach for the knowledge of what she truly was. They watched, and they said nothing, because mountains never do. But if they had, if the mountains had spoken, they would have said what they always say to rivers that have been underground too long. Welcome back. We knew you'd surface eventually. The sea has been waiting. End of Book 1. To be continued in the Alpha's Obsession. Book 2, The Shadow Throne. Copyright The Alpha's Obsession, extended 1-hour audiobook edition. All rights reserved.